tenemos a Carmignac, concretamente a Anne Allier, que es co-manager de Carmignac Sécurité. Anne, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this interview.
Good afternoon.
Anne, markets look really confused about the path that central banks are about to take. Where do you think we're heading to? Do you think that we will have back-to-back rate cuts, or we might have one rate cut followed by maintaining rates, or even possible rate hikes in the future? What do you think?
Well, rate hike, I think it's possible in Japan. But in Europe and in the US, no, not at all, considering the current state of the data and what we are expecting for the future. In Europe, we are for a cut in June by 25 basis points, but after that, being a back-to-back or quarterly cut, it's still a close call, and we will see the market as between 3 and 4 cuts for 2024, and we are not far from what the market is thinking. In US, June is no more a done deal. The Fed is the job of the Fed is complicated by the fact that it is an election year in the US, and the Fed doesn't want to be seen as a intervening in the election, and they might cut in June to be sure that they will be able to cut after that if needed. So maybe one cut in June or July, and then wait and see, looking at the data. For sure, forward guidance from central bank this time are over, and we have now to see each data to assess the next step of central banks.
Mm-hmm. Anne, do you think markets are still driven to a great extent by central bank narrative?
Yes, still, but central banks are driven by data. So at the end, we are back to the old time before 2008, where, there is actual interaction between central banks' narrative, market, and real economy. So central banks are speaking, acting, then the market adjusts, and then the real economy take into account the new state of the market. There is a kind of circle where, you have central banks, market, and real economy, and you go around this cycle. So at the end, I will say that market are driven by a central bank's narrative as much as central banks are driven by market, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Some of the data that the Federal Reserve is really wary of in the U.S. is inflation, and tomorrow we're having inflation data precisely in the U.S. Here it seems to be that inflation is especially sticky around 3%, Anne. What do you think it will take to lower it down? Do you think it's just a matter of time, or would we need more central bank action?
Well, in fact, for sure, we are more concerned by sticky inflation than we were by low inflation in the past decade. What we can say that there is plenty of reason why inflation should be higher now. You have deglobalization, you have protectionism, geopolitical tension, green transition, demography in developing country. All this is pushing inflation higher and making inflation a bit more sticky than what we thought. But the interesting part of that is what can do a central banks against that, because they can't always crash, bring interest rate higher and crash demand and the economy. But how do you make sure that you are able to do a green transition if you make investment to the green transition impossible? How do you, meet the goal of sovereignty in defense, in food, in energy, if investment are made impossible by the cost of the investment to make, or for government to issue at a good price? So it will be interesting to see in the coming years how, the goal of what the political wanted and what central banks' target are, and how they each other adjust to this new area. Maybe we will have to live with higher inflation for the next 10 or 20 years.
Mm-hmm. What is your perspective into fixed income markets, taking into account how unclear the path is for interest rates?
Well, path is unclear, but the good news is that we are paid for that. You know, with the rising yield we have in 2022 and in 2023, a part of 2023, we have now carry in the fixed income market, and we are paid to wait and see, and that's quite new considering the last 15 years. So we don't know where the market will land. Well, just keep, you know, a short-term investment, keep investment grade corporate in the short part of the curve, be active, be flexible, and we will wait to have more clarity about inflation, about central banks' narratives, as we said. And again, that's not a big deal now that you are paid for that.
Do you think right now it's time, Marianne, to look into long duration bonds?
It really depends on where you put your duration. We think that, as we said at the beginning, the market is quite well priced for the short part of the curve, and where, you know, the central banks when and where the central banks should land. So on the short part, let's say medium up to 5 years, I think you can go long in a sense that you are paid. You can buy, you know, investment grade credit. You can buy some government with spread. I think about Italy, Spain, Portugal, even Greece, where, you know, you have spread plus the yield of the German bond. So on this part, you probably can go long for that. For the more longer term investment, that is to say 10 years and above, we don't think it's a good time, or it's too early to go very long. Deficit will still be there in Europe, in US, and generally speaking in the developed country. So you will have a lot of issuance and needs for government to invest, and so a lot of issuance on the long part of the curve. As we say, maybe inflation will be a bit more stickier and higher, and so you will need more premium to invest in the long term. And so for now, it's still a bit early to go long on long duration on the very long part of the curve, but the short to medium part of the curve is a good investment area in our view.
Are you worried, Marianne, about the treasury market because of a possible debt crisis in the US, or do you think that this is nothing to worry about?
Well, debt crisis is maybe a bit exaggerate, but for sure there is a high debt, and it will wait on the long part of the curve. We have seen that in the UK, remember, when we have this flash crash in the UK market following the budget by Liz Truss. So we see that the market is a bit fragile on the long part, and because of the debt of government, but we are not at the point where we can talk about crisis. It will wait on the yield on the long part. We will have higher yield, especially when compared to the last 15 years, but it's not a crisis as such.
Do you favor, right now looking into the fixed income markets, do you favor sovereign bonds versus corporate bonds, or which one do you think is a better investment right now?
Well, again, it depends on the investment horizon. I think on the short to medium term, corporate is probably preferable to government because of the spread you have in the bond, and you can have higher carry. And investment grade corporate, and even some high yield, if you have a good stock, a bond picker, let's say, you have spread and carry that are more than comfortable, and we will prefer corporate on this part. If you really have to invest above 10 years, I would say that probably sovereign is better. Spread are tight at the moment, so you have a little cautious of anything wrong that could happen on the long run. And to make duration on the long part, we will favor sovereign over corporate. On the short to medium term, I think corporate is preferable than sovereign, especially if you look at the financial, for example, on the short part of the curve, where you have spread and very low risk if you stay on developed countries.
What do you think is the best opportunity now, Marianne, in the fixed income market?
Well, I think you had understood that I like the short to medium corporate investment credit, and I love active and flexible management. I think that we are, as I said at the beginning, forward guidance is over. We have now to be very reactive to central banks, very reactive to data, and for that it's very difficult to say, well, I like this kind of asset in the fixed income market, because tomorrow it could change. So if you are just buy and hold, or if you don't want to move very frequently, I think all the short-term funds, credit funds, are a very good area to invest. If you don't want to look at that, I think you have to stick to very active, very flexible investment today.
Marianne Allier, co-manager of Carmignac Sécurité, thank you so much for your time here in Negocios Televisión. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bueno, y nosotros seguimos muy pendientes de cómo está cotizando el mercado, de esas palabras de Lloyd Austin y también